They called him Victor Lamonte, a legendary tycoon whose name alone inspired reverence and sometimes fear across global boardrooms. A man of immense wealth and a relentless will to expand his empire, he believed he was untouchable, until one fateful decision uprooted everything he knew. It began with a single act of rejection. He turned away from the one companion that had never failed him, his loyal horse, Eclipse. In that instant, his life took a perilous turn. Stranded in the vast wilderness he once claimed to own, he discovered how fragile human existence could be. And in a moment of near despair, a kind stranger emerged to guide him back to the man he was meant to be. Victor Lamonte was, by all conventional measures, the epitome of success. At 45, his business empire spanned technology startups in Silicon Valley, luxury hospitality ventures in the Swiss Alps, and even a small chain of boutique hotels dotting Europe's most fashionable cities. His photograph had once graced the cover of Forbes magazine under the headline, "The Relentless Visionary." He held board meetings at the top of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, sipping vintage Chateau Margaux and finalizing deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. There was a certain mystique about him, part visionary, part ruthless negotiator, yet always driven by an insatiable hunger for more. Despite his globe-trotting lifestyle, Victor retained a piece of his youth, a sprawling ranch on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. It was the last standing relic of a simpler time, before global mergers and acquisitions had consumed his life. On that ranch lived Eclipse, a chestnut thoroughbred with a silky mane and a spirit that matched Victor's own once boundless energy. Eclipse had been a gift to Victor from his father when Victor was just 16. While other relationships in Victor's life had changed with the tides of fortune, Eclipse was a constant, loyal, reliable, and affectionate. But as Victor's influence grew, his time on the ranch dwindled. The once cherished horse became little more than a vestige of an old life. Business demands overshadowed everything, and months could pass without Victor visiting his estate in Denver. When he did venture back to the ranch, he often appeared uneasy, almost alien in the tranquil environment. His staff there, ranch hands and caretakers, had grown accustomed to the shift in his demeanor. The boy they remembered was buried under layers of corporate polish and cynicism. On a warm spring morning, after a grueling series of meetings in New York, Victor arrived in Denver for a short break that his doctor insisted he take. The ranch manager, Miguel, greeted him with a tip of his hat. "Welcome back, Mr. Lamonte," said Miguel, guiding Victor to the stables. "Eclipse will be glad to see you." Victor's gaze was distant as he surveyed the rolling pastures that made up his property. There was a time he would have inhaled the scent of grass and felt immediate solace. Now the only thing on his mind was the next deal, the next big opportunity. He offered a curt nod, following Miguel into the stable where Eclipse awaited. The horse whinnied softly, as if recognizing the footsteps of an old friend. For a fleeting moment, Victor felt a pang of warmth in his chest, but it vanished as quickly as it came. In his mind, Eclipse symbolized a piece of his past he could no longer afford to indulge. "He's been doing well," Miguel continued, patting Eclipse's neck. "Still in great shape and temperament." Victor reached out to stroke Eclipse's muzzle. The horse pressed against his hand, remembering days when Victor would spend entire afternoons brushing him, feeding him carrots, and riding through the pastures. "Send him away," Victor said suddenly, pulling his hand back as though burned. "I don't have time for this, and it's a liability. If I'm not riding him, I'm just wasting money on upkeep." Miguel froze. The ranch hands standing nearby looked at their employer in shock. Had they misheard? "Sir, you want to sell Eclipse?" Miguel asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. Victor forced himself to stand firm. "Yes. Auction him. Donate him, do whatever you want. I don't need him anymore." The words felt heavy, as if they were not his own. but they came from his lips nonetheless. The air in the stable grew tense, thick with a sense of betrayal. Eclipse's dark eyes flickered with confusion. He felt the subtle shift in Victor's energy. Miguel tried once more. "Mr. Lamonte, are you sure?" "He's been with you," Victor cut him off. "I'm sure. I want him gone within the week." Then, in an abrupt move, Victor turned and walked away, leaving a wake of silent astonishment behind him. Miguel and the stable hands watched the retreating figure, unsure whether to follow or protest. Only Eclipse whinnied again, oblivious to the complexities of human ambition, but aware that something was deeply amiss. In the days that followed, Victor avoided the stables and tasked his lawyer with finding a suitable buyer for Eclipse. There was an ache he wouldn't acknowledge, a gnawing sense of self-betrayal. He drowned beneath business calls and urgent emails. Removing Eclipse from his life felt like severing a final tie to a part of himself he believed was a distraction, yet the act left him hollow. Little did he know this rejection would be the domino that toppled his carefully curated life. Fate had a way of dismantling walls built on arrogance. And soon, Victor Lamonte would learn that discarding what anchored his humanity would have grave consequences. A week after giving orders to rid himself of Eclipse, Victor found himself embroiled in a venture capital deal that took him back to Denver. Executives from Hong Kong, Paris, and Tokyo flew in to meet at a remote mountaintop retreat center, an audacious setting meant to dazzle. Victor, always keen to impress, insisted on hosting the negotiation somewhere scenic and close to his ranch. He booked the entire lodge for a private summit. On the morning of the final negotiation, a sudden phone call from Miguel arrived. Victor eyed his phone, annoyance flaring as he recognized the ranch manager's name. "What is it?" he snapped, stepping aside from the group of executives. Miguel's voice was tense. "Sir, no one has shown interest in Eclipse that I feel comfortable handing him over to. These buyers, they're questionable, to say the least." Victor tightened his grip on the phone. "I asked you to handle it, so handle it." He ended the call before Miguel could protest further. He rejoined the group, forcing a confident smile, but his mind flitted back to Eclipse for just a second. That same gnawing sensation returned, but he clamped down on it. Within moments, he was fully immersed in the negotiation. The meeting dragged on for hours, and the weather outside turned ominous. Grey clouds amassed over the foothills. Wind began to howl across the lodge's perimeter, rattling the windows. A seasoned local might have recognized it as the precursor to one of Colorado's notorious spring storms that could morph into blizzards without warning. Victor's plan was to drive down to the ranch afterward, but the swirling winds cast doubt on that intention. Still, he had a show to maintain. He was Victor Lamonte, the man unstoppable by nature or circumstances. When the final handshake was sealed and the multi-million-dollar agreement was verbally locked in, the group parted ways. The foreign executives had arrived by private helicopter, which whisked them away just before the weather worsened. Victor's chauffeur, however, was instructed to wait for him at the base of the mountain in an SUV. As Victor exited the lodge, a biting wind cut into his face. Snow flurries began to swirl in the air. He almost reconsidered traveling, but chose pride over caution. That's when he received a text from his chauffeur. The roads were deteriorating too quickly, and local authorities advised against driving up any further. The chauffeur had turned back. Undeterred, Victor commandeered a spare four-wheel drive vehicle from the lodge's staff. He believed that with his driving skills and a sturdy SUV, he could handle the storm. He had driven in tough conditions before. How bad could it get? Within minutes of leaving the lodge, visibility plummeted. Snow fell in thick sheets, and the wind whipped into a frenzy. The roads, winding and narrow, vanished under a layer of white. Giant pine trees flanked the road, swaying ominously. Victor's heart began to pound as the SUV struggled against the force of the wind, tires skidding on icy patches. But he pushed on, refusing to acknowledge the danger. No storm would bend him. He was halfway down the mountain when he made a critical miscalculation, a black ice patch. The SUV fishtailed violently as Victor wrestled with the steering wheel. A gut-wrenching screech tore through the air. The vehicle spun out of control, careening off the road and down a small embankment. It plowed into a snowdrift with a jarring thud. For a moment, Victor sat in stunned silence, his pulse hammering. He tested the ignition, but the engine coughed and died. He tried again, and again nothing. Outside, the wind roared like a furious beast. His phone had no signal in this remote stretch. Panic descended upon him as the cold seeped through the SUV's cracked windows. He tried opening the door, only to find it partially wedged by snow. After some effort, he managed to push it open enough to step out. Immediately, the biting cold and swirling snow assaulted his senses, nearly toppling him. He shouted into the storm, but there was no one to hear him. The harsh truth settled in. He was stranded. It was a cruel, ironic twist of fate. Victor Lamonti, who had once boasted about controlling every aspect of his life, now found himself at the mercy of nature alone, unprepared and far from help. Images flashed in his mind. The ranch, the negotiation, Eclipse's gentle eyes. His rejection of the horse might have seemed inconsequential in a boardroom, but here, his isolation felt deserved, as though the universe had orchestrated a lesson he could not ignore. Summoning his strength, Victor braced himself. He had to walk. If he stayed in the SUV, hypothermia would claim him before rescue arrived, if rescue arrived at all. Gritting his teeth, he trudged into the blizzard, searching for shelter, painfully aware that he might not make it through the night. Sasha Morgan had lived in these mountains for most of her life. She was a wildlife photographer, a free spirit who found refuge in the unpredictable rhythms of nature. On that stormy afternoon, she was holed up in her cabin, located a few miles off the main road. Through a window pane frosted with swirling snow, she watched the storm churn. She was used to Colorado's temperamental weather, but something about this storm felt particularly vicious. Snow lashed the pine trees, building drifts at alarming speed. Power lines flickered ominously. Sasha's golden retriever, Jasper, paced anxiously near the door. Though she would have preferred to remain indoors, warm beside her wood-burning stove, she knew better. A storm of this magnitude often spelled trouble for stranded travelers. Sasha volunteered with a local search and rescue unit on occasion. Her intuition told her someone might need help. She wrapped herself in a thick coat, laced her sturdy boots, and checked her backpack of emergency supplies, flares, first aid kit, blankets, and a thermos of hot tea. Jasper barked as she opened the door, stepping out into the white fury. She pulled on her snow goggles, each breath crystallizing in the air as she navigated through the vortex. The main road was barely visible beneath a blanket of fresh powder. She trudged carefully, each step sinking calf deep in snow. The wind howled, and the cold sliced through her layers. Yet she pressed on. After half an hour, she spotted what looked like tire tracks veering off the road. They led down a small embankment, but with the snow piling up fast, they were already half buried. Heart pounding, Sasha followed the tracks. That's when she saw a faint silhouette moving against the white haze, a man stumbling through the snow. "Hey, are you all right?" she shouted, voice carried away by the wind. The figure collapsed to his knees before attempting to stand again, clearly disoriented. Sasha quickened her pace, urging Jasper forward. As she neared, she realized the man's face was ghostly pale, lips nearly blue. His expensive wool overcoat and polished shoes were ill-suited for a full-blown blizzard. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a corporate office. That was exactly who Victor Lamonti was. Sasha reached him just as he pitched forward again. She dropped to her knees, brushing the snow from his face. His eyes fluttered open, revealing a mix of fear, exhaustion, and delirium. "Stay with me," she said firmly, slipping a blanket from her pack around his shoulders. "Can you stand?" He mumbled something incoherent. Then, with a last semblance of effort, he tried to speak. "One. The car crashed," he managed, voice cracking. "I can't feel my hands." Sasha studied him, recognizing hypothermia's telltale signs. She helped him to his feet. Jasper barked anxiously, as though urging them to hurry. "We need to get you warm," she said, guiding him carefully back toward the road. "My cabin's not far, just a bit further." Victor stumbled, leaning heavily on her. He had never felt so powerless, so vulnerable. In the haze of his mind, he realized that if not for this stranger, he might have died in the storm. Step by excruciating step, they made their way to Sasha's modest truck, parked near the road. She helped him into the passenger seat, cranked up the heat, and rushed back to grab Jasper. As they drove the short distance to her cabin, Victor shivered uncontrollably. He tried to form words of gratitude, but found himself unable to speak more than a broken sentence. Yet, he could not deny the surge of relief flooding him. From the recesses of delirium, he understood one thing. This woman, whoever she was, had just saved his life. Sasha's cabin was a small wooden haven, tucked among towering pines whose branches now drooped under the weight of heavy snow. She eased the truck into a makeshift driveway, cut the engine, and hurried around to help Victor, who was nearly limp from exhaustion. Jasper bounded out, whining softly, as though sensing the man's distress. Inside, the cabin glowed with the warmth of a wood-burning stove. A soft rug lay near the hearth, and shelves lined with nature books, photography equipment, and trinkets from Sasha's travels filled the cozy space. Thick curtains covered the windows, helping insulate against the raging storm outside. Sasha helped Victor out of his soaked overcoat and guided him to sit on a worn leather sofa near the fire. She moved swiftly, her experience with rescue situations kicking in. She offered him a thick wool blanket, then knelt by the stove to feed a few more logs into the flames. Victor's teeth chattered. He felt pins and needles stinging his fingertips, the slow return of blood flow. At last, the suffocating numbness began to recede. Something about the crackling fire soothed his panic, and he let out a shaky breath. "The thank you," he managed, barely audible. Sasha gave him a half-smile. "Let's warm you up first, then we can talk. Here, drink this." She handed him a steaming mug of tea, a strong brew spiced with ginger. "You were lucky I found you when I did." Victor stared at the tea for a moment, his mind spinning. He was used to crystal glasses of the finest liquor, not chipped ceramic mugs, in a humble cabin. Yet, as he sipped, the heat coursed through his body, awakening a sense of gratitude he rarely allowed himself to feel. Outside, the storm raged on. Snow battered the windows, the wind howled through the rafters. Despite the fury beyond these walls, inside felt safe. It unsettled Victor how comforted he felt in this stranger's simple home. He glanced at Sasha, her short, wavy hair peeking out from under a knit cap, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and a look of quiet determination in her eyes. She removed her coat, revealing a flannel shirt and jeans, the attire of someone ready for any outdoor challenge. "Do you have a phone I can use?" Victor croaked. Sasha looked apologetic. "Cell service is spotty up here, especially during storms. The power might go in and out. I do have an old landline, but the lines are probably down. We can try later if it clears up." He frowned, frustration creeping in. This was uncharted territory for him, completely disconnected from his world, reliant on a stranger's charity. "I need to make contact. People rely on me," he said. Sasha arched an eyebrow. "I'm sure they do, but right now you need rest. Once the storm passes, maybe we can see about getting you back." "What's your name?" he hesitated. In any other situation, he'd have introduced himself as Victor Lamonte, expecting immediate recognition. But here, with this woman, something held him back from unleashing the weight of his reputation. "Victor," he said simply. "I'm Sasha," she replied, kneeling to peel off her boots. "Welcome to my humble abode, Victor. You should take off your shoes and wet socks before you catch frostbite." He followed her instructions, gingerly removing his designer loafers, now ruined, and his soaked socks. Sasha brought him a pair of thick wool socks from a drawer, which he slipped on, grateful for the warmth. The cabin's walls bore framed photographs, eagles in mid-flight, snow-capped mountains at sunrise, a herd of wild mustangs galloping across a valley. Each image captured a moment of raw, natural beauty. Victor was momentarily struck by a photograph of a horse with a shimmering chestnut coat. It reminded him of Eclipse. "You're a photographer?" he asked, voice rasping. Sasha looked up from where she was rummaging through a bag for additional blankets. "Wildlife photographer, yes. I sell prints, do some freelance magazine work. It's not glamorous, but it's a life I love." Victor nodded, leaning back on the sofa. Exhaustion weighed on his eyelids, but curiosity stirred within him. He had spent a fortune on curated art pieces for his penthouse, but there was a raw soul to Sasha's photos that none of his acquisitions possessed. His gaze drifted again to the photograph of the chestnut horse, and a surge of regret took him by surprise, cutting deeper than he cared to admit. Sasha noticed his fixation. "That's Starburst, a wild mare I encountered a few years ago. She was a resilient creature, living off the land with her herd despite harsh conditions." Victor swallowed hard, thinking of Eclipse. He cleared his throat. "I see. Are you all right?" she asked softly, noticing his pained expression. He mustered a nonchalant shrug. "Just thinking about something from my past." Sasha nodded, respectful enough not to pry. "Take your time. You've been through an ordeal. Try to get some rest. I'll make some soup." As she busied herself in the small kitchen, Victor's eyes grew heavy. The warmth, the tea, and the comforting crackle of the fire lulled him into a drowsy state. He fought it briefly, concerned about how precarious his situation was, but the day's exhaustion crashed over him, and he finally gave in, slipping into a dream-swept sleep. In Victor's fitful sleep, visions came unbidden. He was a teenager again, galloping across the ranch's wide-open pastures atop Eclipse, the wind in his hair and laughter in his throat. He felt pure, boundless joy, the harmony between a boy and his horse, unfettered by ambition or greed. Then the dream twisted, and he found himself trapped in an opulent boardroom. High windows revealed stormy skies outside, and Eclipse stood at the far side of the table, gazing at Victor with sorrowful eyes. Victor tried to rise, but he was pinned to his leather executive chair, forced to watch as Eclipse turned away, disappearing into swirling darkness. He woke with a start, heart pounding. The cabin's interior was dim, lit now by a single lantern and the dying embers of the fire. It must have been night. He blinked, disoriented, until the memories returned: the blizzard, the crash, the kind woman named Sasha. A wave of relief washed over him, followed by a pang of deep-seated guilt. Sasha stirred from a nearby armchair where she had dozed off. "You're awake," she said, her voice groggy. She stood, stretched her arms, and checked the stove. "I'm sorry, the fire almost went out." "Let me stoke it," she added fresh logs, coaxing the flames back to life. The soft glow illuminated the cabin, revealing the haggard lines on Victor's face and the genuine concern on Sasha's. "How long was I out?" Victor asked, wincing as he tried to sit up straighter. "A few hours," she replied. "I made soup earlier. It's cold now, but I can heat it back up if you're hungry." A rumble in his stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten all day. "That would be nice. Thank you." As she warmed the soup on the stove, the wind roared outside, reminding them that the storm had not yet abated. Occasional rattles at the window signaled gusts powerful enough to shake the cabin. "You really live here alone?" Victor asked, trying to make sense of this life so different from his own. Sasha ladled soup into a bowl and carried it to him. "Pretty much," she said. "Jasper's my companion. I travel for photography often, but when I'm home, it's just me and the wilderness. I like it that way, simpler, more genuine." He sipped the soup thick with vegetables and a hearty broth and let the warmth spread through him. He was surprised by how much he liked it. Familiar, city-bred arrogance almost made him want to critique it, but something held him back, perhaps gratitude or embarrassment. Sasha watched him carefully. "You're Victor," she repeated, as if turning the name over in her mind. "You don't seem like the typical mountain traveler. What brought you up here during a storm?" he sighed. "Business. I had a meeting at a lodge on the summit. I thought I could drive back before the weather got too bad." She nodded. "That was reckless. Even I wouldn't have risked these roads in a storm like this. Not alone, anyway." A flicker of annoyance lit his eyes, but he tempered it. She had saved him after all. "I underestimated the storm," he admitted, "and I overestimated my own capability." They fell into a contemplative silence. The soup was surprisingly delicious, or maybe hunger made it taste divine. Sasha took a seat across from him, her expression curious yet kind. "I don't want to pry," she said gently, "but I get the sense you're dealing with something more than just being stranded. I saw the way you looked at that horse photograph." Victor stiffened. A part of him wanted to lash out, to insist she mind her own business. Yet, in the quiet comfort of this cabin, with the storm raging outside, he found himself letting his guard down. "It reminded me of a horse I used to own," he said softly. "Eclipse. He meant a lot to me once." She leaned forward, her gaze encouraging. "What happened?" Victor swallowed. The confession weighed heavily on his tongue. "I neglected him for years. Then, a few days ago, I made the decision to sell him. It felt easier than dealing with his care. It's just a horse, I told myself. But now, I'm not sure I did the right thing." Sasha's eyes flickered with empathy. "We often realize the value of what we have only after we push it away." His chest tightened. The memory of Eclipse's confused eyes in the stable felt like a punch to his gut. Though he tried to compose himself, a surge of emotion threatened to break free, a mixture of regret, sorrow, and self-anger. Before he could say anything more, the lantern flickered and the lights above them dimmed, casting the cabin into shadows. The storm must have rattled the power lines. Sasha reached for a flashlight, illuminating the space with a beam of gentle light. "Looks like the power is out," she said, a hint of a resigned sigh in her voice. "But we'll be fine with the fireplace and the lantern. I'm used to this, used to adversity, used to forging ahead." Victor realized how unaccustomed he was to disruptions in his meticulously controlled life. He stared at Sasha, at her calm demeanor in the face of total isolation and a raging storm. It was humbling to see such resilience in someone living so modestly. They settled into an unspoken truce, two strangers bound by circumstance, each nursing their unvoiced pains. For Sasha, a quiet life was a choice. For Victor, it was an impossibility. He thrived on deals, on the energy of a city that never slept. Yet, in this unexpected refuge, he found a measure of introspection that eluded him in penthouse suites and executive limousines. Soon, Sasha guided him back to the sofa, piling on extra blankets. "Try to rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." He nodded, eyes drifting to the flickering embers in the fireplace. The heat lulled him into a contemplative stupor, thoughts swirling like the snow outside. For the first time in years, his mind was quiet enough to hear the voice of his own regret. As the wind howled, he wondered if this was a turning point or just another detour in his relentless pursuit of control. Morning brought a gentle silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world muffled under a thick blanket of pristine snow. Sunlight filtered through the cabin's windows, creating patches of dazzling brightness on the floor. Victor woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jasper whining at the door, eager to explore the fresh drifts. Sasha was already up, wearing a heavy parka. She had stacked some logs beside the fireplace and was sipping her coffee by the window. "The storm's over," she said without turning around, "but it's deep out there. We might be stuck for a bit." Victor rubbed his eyes, feeling the soreness in his limbs. "How long do you think until the roads are clear?" she shrugged. "Could be a day or two before the snowplows make it this far. In the meantime, we should see about your car. Maybe we can salvage something, or at least check for your belongings." He glanced down at his mud-spattered trousers, now stiff with dried slush. The memory of the crash made him shiver. "I might need gear, clothes." Sasha smiled slightly. "I have some spares that might fit. We can layer you up. I don't have fancy suits, but they'll keep you warm." A pang of self-consciousness struck him. He was used to tailor-made attire, yet here he would be borrowing a stranger's clothes. It felt humbling, perhaps. That was the point. After breakfast, simple toast and scrambled eggs, Sasha lent him thick thermal pants, a sweater, and a weatherproof jacket. Victor changed in the small bathroom, awkward in the unfamiliar garments, but grateful. When he emerged, Sasha handed him a pair of sturdy boots. "Ready?" she asked, hooking a camera around her neck. "I might as well get some shots while we're out there." They stepped outside, greeted by a breathtaking panorama. The landscape, silent and glistening, sprawled in every direction. The pine trees were cloaked in white, branches bending under the snow's weight. A soft crunch accompanied each step. Jasper bounded ahead, barking excitedly. Victor's breath fogged in the cold air. Together, they trekked toward where Sasha had rescued Victor. It was a slow walk, waist-deep in some snowdrifts, but eventually they found the site. The SUV was partially buried. Any attempt to drive it out was impossible without heavy machinery. Victor pried open the passenger door to retrieve his briefcase, phone, and a few personal items. "Still no signal," he muttered, waving his phone around. "This is insane." Sasha only nodded. "We're in a dead zone. We'll have to wait until we can get to higher ground or the road's clear." He tried to maintain composure, but frustration prickled. He was used to orchestrating multi-million-dollar deals at a moment's notice, yet now he couldn't even make a simple call. Another wave of helplessness washed over him. They headed back, carefully navigating through the drifts. Sasha snapped photos of the mountains, the trees, and even Jasper leaping in the snow. Victor watched her work, intrigued by how a single woman could remain so composed in a situation that left him, a global tycoon, feeling lost. "You really enjoy this?" he asked, gesturing at the vast snow-covered expanse. "Living out here, dealing with storms and isolation?" She lowered her camera, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Yes, I do. The mountains are honest. They show you how small you are. That can be scary, but it's also freeing." He considered her words, glancing at the sprawling wilderness. Once, he might have found the idea laughable, but after the near-death experience and the humbling rescue, he could sense some truth in it. When they returned to the cabin, Sasha set up a makeshift drying station for his briefcase and possessions near the stove. She rummaged through her supplies, taking stock of food. "We have enough to last a week if we ration. Hopefully, we won't need that long." Victor gave her a tight smile. "Thank you for taking me in. I know this wasn't part of your plan." She shrugged lightly. "Life rarely goes according to plan. I'm just glad I got to you in time." Their eyes met for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. This accident had thrust them together, two strangers from vastly different worlds. In the fireplace's soft glow, the disparity of their lives felt stark, and yet a subtle thread of connection was forming. Days melded together in the snowy highlands. The roads remained impassable, phone lines down, and the two of them were forced into an uneasy companionship. Sasha went about her daily chores, collecting firewood, melting snow for water, tending to small repairs in the cabin. Victor, unfamiliar with physical labor, tried to help where he could. It was a departure from his usual boardroom battles. He found solace in small tasks, chopping, kindling, learning to start the fire, washing dishes. At first, it felt menial and beneath him. Over time, though, he discovered a certain peace in these simple acts. Each chore became a reprieve from the unrelenting demands that once defined his life. One afternoon, while Sasha was busy labeling her photos, Victor stood at the cabin window, gazing at the vast, wintry wilderness. A memory pricked at his consciousness, the day he told Miguel to get rid of Eclipse. The memory left a bitter aftertaste, fueling a sense of shame he couldn't shake. Quietly, Sasha approached, a mug of coffee in her hand. She offered it to him. "You've been standing there for a while. Everything okay?" He managed a small nod, but his eyes were clouded with regret. "I'm thinking about my horse," he admitted, "about how I cast him aside without a second thought." Sasha took a slow sip of her own coffee. "What made you do that?" "Ambition, I guess," he said, staring out at the wind-sculpted drifts. "I told myself I didn't have time for him, that he was a financial burden. But that was just an excuse to distance myself. My father gave me Eclipse when I was 16. It was the last real connection to a simpler, happier time in my life. Maybe I've spent years burying that time because I thought I needed to be ruthless to succeed." Sasha gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes we shut out the things that remind us of what we've lost. But it's never too late to make amends, if you really want to." Victor turned to her, vulnerability etched into his features. "I'm not sure how. I've spent years building my empire, forging my image as an unstoppable force. But here, surrounded by silence and snow, I see how hollow that force can be." She offered a sympathetic smile. "None of us are unstoppable, Victor. That's just an illusion. You can choose differently if you really desire it." He mulled over her words. They stung, but in a way that felt like a necessary wake-up call. The man who once believed he controlled his destiny now stood on shaky ground, questioning everything. Rather than run from that uncertainty, he decided to confront it, like facing a wild horse that needed gentle taming. That evening, the fire crackled merrily as Sasha and Victor shared a simple dinner, canned stew and some cornbread Sasha had managed to bake. Conversation flowed more easily now. Sasha recounted how she left a corporate marketing job in Denver years ago, craving freedom and authenticity. She described the spark of passion she found behind a camera lens, capturing fleeting moments of nature's grandeur. Victor was mesmerized by how at peace she seemed with her choices. As the firelight danced across her face, he recognized a contentment he had never experienced. Envy crept in, mingled with admiration. When the meal was done, they lingered on the sofa, each cradling a mug of tea. Soft glow lit the cabin walls, and outside, the moon illuminated the snowfields. Jasper lay dozing at their feet. "Do you regret leaving your old life?" Victor asked suddenly. Sasha shrugged thoughtfully. "I regret not doing it sooner. Sometimes I miss certain comforts, but I never miss the constant race. The mountains taught me that you can't outrun the important stuff." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sometimes I wonder if I've been running my whole life, trying to prove something." She observed him quietly, letting the silence stretch. Then, in a gentle tone, she said, "To prove what? And to whom?" He didn't respond at first. Then, as though a dam had broken, words spilled out in a rush. He spoke of his father's high expectations, of the cold distance between them and the massive empire left for Victor to expand. He confessed how every achievement felt like a fleeting high, quickly replaced by the need for another conquest. He described the shallow relationships he had formed, women he dated for status, friends who were more like business partners, and a schedule that never let him breathe. Finally, he told her about Eclipse, the last tie to any real innocence he had possessed. By the time he finished, the fire had burned low, casting shadows on the walls. Sasha listened, her face a canvas of empathy. She reached for his hand, a soft, grounding touch that made his eyes sting with unshed tears. "Victor," she whispered, "nothing you've done is irreversible. You can always change course, make peace with your past. You just have to decide it's worth the effort." He nodded, swallowing hard. The sincerity in her eyes struck him deeply. For the first time in years, he felt heard, truly heard, without any ulterior motive or transaction in play. He realized he was on the cusp of something profound, the rediscovery of his own humanity. They sat there, hands entwined, until the cabin grew dark and the moon rose high. There were no boardrooms, no accolades, no performance metrics, just two souls, side by side, finding solace in honesty. In the hush of that moment, Victor vowed silently that if he got out of these mountains, he would do more than return to his old life. He would reclaim the compassion and humility he had once lost. The following morning, they woke to find the snowplows had finally made some progress. Over breakfast, Sasha handed Victor a folded map. "I think we should go to a nearby town. The plows have cleared part of the main road. We can probably hitch a ride or call someone from there." He felt a curious pang of regret. While he was desperate to reconnect with the outside world, he also felt reluctant to leave the cabin. It had become a sanctuary of self-discovery, and Sasha had become an anchor in a storm far more profound than the snowstorm that had stranded him. They loaded Sasha's truck with emergency gear, extra blankets, and Jasper hopped in the back. The drive was slow over partially cleared roads, but eventually they reached a small mountain town nestled in a valley. Its main street was lined with quaint shops, a gas station, and a tiny diner. Smoke wafted from chimneys, and people were out shoveling snow from sidewalks. At the diner, they found a functioning landline. Victor called his chauffeur and personal assistant. The relief in their voices was palpable. They had feared the worst when he stopped answering calls. He gave instructions for them to come pick him up immediately. Sasha excused herself to give him privacy. After he finished the call, he joined her in a corner booth. They ordered hot chocolate, and for a moment, said little. When the drinks arrived, Sasha finally broke the silence. "You'll be leaving soon," she said, a statement rather than a question. He nodded. "My team is on their way. I have to get back." He trailed off, uncertain how to finish the sentence. Back to what? The endless deals, the hectic schedule, the empire he built. Sasha offered a warm, if slightly sad, smile. "Remember what you told me last night. Don't forget it once you leave here." He reached across the table, clasping her hand. "I won't, I promise. There's a lot I need to fix, starting with Eclipse." They finished their drinks, a bittersweet tension hovering in the air. Within an hour, Victor's chauffeur arrived in a luxury SUV, the difference stark compared to Sasha's battered truck. The chauffeur leapt out, fussing over Victor, apologizing for leaving him stranded, offering warm towels and bottled water. Victor paused mid-offer and turned to Sasha. "Come with me," he blurted. The words surprised even him. She blinked, taken aback. "What? Not permanently," he clarified, feeling a blush creep up his cheeks. "Just for a bit. Maybe until the roads are cleared for good. I can take you back to Denver, put you up somewhere decent. You saved my life. I want to return the favor." Sasha considered his offer, her eyes softening. "I appreciate that, Victor, but I'm fine here. This is my home. He nodded, though a flicker of disappointment crossed his face. "Then, at least let me repay you for your trouble," she chuckled wryly. "You owe me nothing. But if you insist, maybe you can help me get my next photography exhibit a decent sponsor. That is, if you think my work is worth it." A genuine grin spread across Victor's face. "Absolutely. Send me your portfolio, your plans. I'll make it happen." They exchanged contact information. She gave him a simple business card with her name and a hand-drawn mountain logo. He gave her his personal number, a rare courtesy reserved for people he actually cared about. Before stepping into the SUV, he turned back, meeting her gaze one last time. "Thank you, Sasha, for everything." She nodded, a hint of moisture in her eyes. "Go find your horse, Victor." The drive back to Denver felt surreal. The city's skyline, once a comforting testament to his power, now struck him as cold and impersonal. On the journey, he made a call to Miguel at the ranch. "Miguel, is Eclipse still there?" Victor asked, tension threading his voice. There was a pause, then Miguel answered cautiously, "Yes, Mr. Lamonte." I held off selling him. Didn't feel right. A wave of relief washed over Victor, so strong he almost couldn't speak. "I'm glad you did. I'm coming home." Later that day, he arrived at the ranch. Snow still blanketed the fields, glittering under the waning sunlight. He strode toward the stable, heart pounding with anticipation and trepidation. How would Eclipse react? Had he already distanced himself from the man who had cast him aside? Miguel greeted him with a respectful nod. "Eclipse is inside," he said quietly. Victor stepped into the stable. The familiar scent of hay and horses enveloped him. Eclipse stood in his stall, head lowered. Victor approached slowly, voice trembling with emotion. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, extending a hand. The horse raised his head, ears twitching. Eclipse regarded Victor with cautious eyes. Then, with a tentative step forward, he pressed his muzzle into Victor's palm. Tears blurred Victor's vision. He stroked Eclipse's mane, the horse's soft warmth, a balm for his guilt-ridden heart. "I'm sorry," Victor whispered, pressing his forehead against Eclipse's. "I forgot who I was. I forgot you were more than just a thing to be discarded." Eclipse nickered softly, as if granting forgiveness in the silent language only animals understand. A wave of relief and gratitude flowed through Victor, as cleansing as the mountain storm that nearly claimed his life. He spent the rest of the evening in the stable, brushing Eclipse, talking to him in hushed tones as though catching up on lost years. Miguel watched from a distance, a subtle smile on his weathered face. When Victor finally emerged, he looked different, lighter, as though he had shed a layer of armor. He walked the grounds, letting the ranch's expansive calm wash over him. Somewhere in the distance, he swore he could hear Sasha's voice. "It's never too late to make amends." That night, Victor slept in his ranch house, not in the opulent Denver penthouse. He had never felt so at peace. In his dreams, he saw Sasha standing on her porch, camera slung over her shoulder, a gentle smile curving her lips. He silently pledged he wouldn't lose the lessons she taught him in the wilderness. Over the weeks that followed, Victor upended the course of his life. He arranged for Eclipse to receive the best possible care. He found time to visit the ranch nearly every weekend, riding Eclipse across the rolling hills, reconnecting with the boy he once was. In his business empire, changes were subtle but impactful. He delegated responsibilities more evenly, giving up the iron grip he held on every transaction. He introduced new employee benefits, philanthropic initiatives, and quieter board meetings that focused on sustainable growth rather than cutthroat expansion. Some critics called him soft, but Victor recognized it as compassion. True to his promise, he helped Sasha secure a sponsorship for her photography exhibit in Denver. The opening night was a modest but heartfelt affair in a local gallery. Her photographs of wild horses, pristine landscapes, and mountain storms drew a crowd. Critics praised her work's raw energy, and people left inspired. Victor attended quietly, slipping in through a side door. He admired each photograph, recalling how she risked life and limb to capture beauty in remote places. Near the end of the exhibit, he found Sasha standing by a photograph of Starburst, the wild mare. She smiled when she saw him. "Look at this turnout," she said excitedly. "It's incredible." He nodded, eyes gleaming with pride. "You deserve it. Your work is magnificent." She glanced at the photo of the mare, then at Victor. "And how's Eclipse?" He grinned, pulling out his phone to show her a picture of him riding Eclipse at sunset. "He's doing great. We both are, actually." She studied the picture, her face lighting up with genuine happiness. Then, a brief silence passed between them, filled with unspoken gratitude and lingering possibility. Outside, the city lights twinkled, but inside, they stood among the images that once captivated Sasha's solitary world. Eventually, Sasha leaned in and whispered, "I'm glad you found your way back to him and to yourself." He placed a hand over hers, voice softened by emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." Their eyes locked in a moment of shared understanding, a sense that they had both emerged from that fateful storm carrying something more precious than they'd had before, a renewed belief in connection, in second chances, and in the quiet power of empathy. The gallery lights dimmed, signaling the exhibit's close. Visitors filed out, leaving behind the echoes of awe. Victor and Sasha remained, lingering in the quiet hush, each grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Outside, the night sky was clear, stars shimmering like promises on the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, the gentle neigh of a horse seemed to echo in approval. Thank you for journeying through this heartfelt tale of a wealthy tycoon's downfall and redemption in the wake of a mountain storm. We followed Victor Lamonte as he confronted his deepest regrets, turning his back on his loyal horse, and realized the profound need for compassion and humility. His chance meeting with Sasha not only saved his life, but also reignited a part of him that had long been dormant, reminding us all that true richness is measured by the bonds we nurture, not just the empires we build. If you felt inspired by Victor's transformation or touched by the kindness Sasha displayed, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends and family, and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps us bring more stories of resilience, connection, and personal growth to life. Thank you for watching, and remember, change is always possible if we open our hearts.